The Pine Hill Cemetery, also known as Pine Hill Memorial Park, is located in Port Richey, Florida. It was established in the early 1900s and has served as a burial ground for residents of the area for over a century. The cemetery contains graves of many notable individuals and families from the local community. As with many cemeteries, its history is intertwined with the history of the community it serves, reflecting the culture and demographics over time. This cemetery was once nestled on the back roads between two small coastal communities. Those small communities exploded with the development and became known as New Port Richey and Port Richey. The cemetery came into existence in 1916 when the ladies of the New Port Richey Civic Club saw the need for a cemetery of their own in their town. They began to seek local property owners to establish this cemetery. George R. Sims, one of the community's most prominent businessmen and property owners, generously donated the 2.2 acres where the cemetery was placed. On November 26, 1916, the Tampa Morning Tribune reported, "Through the efforts of the Women's Civic Club, the Board of Trade is taking steps to secure 10 acres of land for the cemetery. The tract under consideration is about halfway between Efflers and New Port Richey, near the Dixie Highway. It is a high oak land, slightly rolling, and when improved, will make a beautiful resting place for the dead. It is the plan for the communities of Efflers, Port Richey, and New Port Richey to purchase the land to form the Cemetery Association. Committees are being appointed to complete the plans to incorporate this association." A notice in the Dade City Banner of October 5, 1917, stated that an application would be made to Judge O.K. Reeves on November 5, 1917, for a charter incorporating the Pine Hill Community Cemetery Association. The women listed on the original charter members were Minnie Borosma, Lonnie Clark, Alice Davis, Jenny Leach, Emma Rohan, and Nettie Sheldon. On March 27, 1919, the Port Richey Press reported that the Cemetery Association called a meeting to discuss and devise means for putting the cemetery area into a proper condition. The association stated that their cemetery property needed to be cleared and fenced. They also discussed the plots needing to be laid out with stakes at each corners for the later purpose of locating and identifying them. An article that was published on February 16, 1920, the New Port Richey Press states that New Port Richey's new cemetery will be known as Pine Hill Cemetery, which is beautifully located 1.5 miles north of town. Mr. Randolph and one other party, whose name is ineligible, on the article surveyed the 2.5 acre plot. The article states that soon lots and driveways will be put in. The article also states that Mrs. J.H. Moran was the president of the Cemetery Association at that time. There are several other articles later printed announcing the group gathering and cleaning the cemetery on a regular basis. There were funds collected for this purpose. On May 15, 1926, the cemetery property was deeded to the city of New Port Richey. At this point, the cemetery's maintenance became the responsibility of the city of New Port Richey, along with the help of family members of the deceased. It still remains this way today. On June 6, 1930, the New Port Richey Press reported, "An inquiry elicited the information from Councilman A.J. Pauls, who is in charge of the cemetery, that the first person buried in the Pine Hill Cemetery was one C.E. Friel, a federal soldier in 1917. Since then, they were buried in what's known as the Soldier's Plot, along with others: Moses Gray, Hiram Seeley, John Dalby, Alan B. Fleckler, S.B. Davis, and J.B. Huff. In addition, they wish to learn about the history of Moses Gray and the private family plots of Benjamin Garrett, John O. Humphrey, and John W. Gurney. At present, there are but 2 stone markers in the soldier's plot. The government furnishes these stones free upon the identity of the soldier and his service to the United States being proven. Councilman Pauls is anxious to learn the war history of Moses Gray, C.E. Friels, and John Dalby, and would appreciate any information given, or he would like to be put in touch with any of their friends or family. For many years, this cemetery suffered at the hands of numerous vandals, and what the vandals didn't get, the lawnmowers did. There are a number of unmarked graves in the cemetery, many that at one time had temporary metal markers for them. The cemetery has been recently cared for and is in much better condition than in those past days. There are still many signs of neglect, however, that can be seen throughout because of unmarked graves and broken headstones. There are many establishing members of the cities of New Port Richey and Port Richey interred here, making it a historic cemetery. This is one of the few cemeteries in Pasco County that contains no burials for Confederate soldiers. However, the cemetery does include more than 10 Union soldiers that are interred here. Among the veterans interred at Pine Hill Cemetery is the Medal of Honor recipient James W. Huff. James was born in either Washington County or Washington Township, Pennsylvania, circa February 2nd, 1840 to 1843. The exact location and dates of James's birth isn't clear because there are conflicting records on both. According to service records during the Civil War, James W. Huff enlisted in the Van Buren, PA, with the 85th Pennsylvania Infantry on November 14, 1862. He was transferred and served with Company L of the 4th Regiment, U.S. Artillery, Regular Army. However, it was not this service that he received his Medal of Honor for. After his Civil War service, James enlisted as a sergeant with Company L of the 1st U.S. Cavalry. In 1873, after Brigadier General George Crook became commander of the Department of Arizona in 1871, he undertook a series of winter campaigns by small detachments, which were to pacify the region by 1874. In the years that followed, the Indian Bureau's policy of frequent removal created new dissatisfaction among the Apaches. Dissident elements went off the reservations. They were led by Chato, Victorio, Geronimo, and other chiefs, and raided settlements along both sides of the border, escaping into Mexico or the United States as circumstances dictated. It was during these winter campaigns that James W. Huff was injured. According to records from the Department of Veteran Affairs, on April 12, 1875, James received the Medal of Honor, the highest military honor, citing his gallant engagements with the Apaches. Sometime after his military service, James moved to Georgia and retired, according to the 1900 federal census. According to an article in the St. Pete Times, dated April 21, 2002, James moved to New Port Richey in 1919. According to the 1920 federal census, James, now 72, was living in District 17, which is New Port Richey, with his wife and 2 sons, James Jr. and Edgar. James was laid to rest in the Pine Hill Cemetery on November 30th, 1927. Sergeant Huff's final resting place is shown here. It is on the east side of the cemetery, away from the soldiers' plot that is on the west side. However, it is still beautifully maintained. Please come by and pay your respects to not only our honored war dead, but to the first African American settlers of West Pasco County.